All right, I think we are moving on to Isaiah, who
Yeah.
says, why would the supernatural even exist? So, wonderful question. I think that's a good one to move on to.
Hey there, Isaiah.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, how's it going, Brian?
Doing all right.
Aloha, Laura. Good to speak
Aloha. Thank you. You too.
with you. Yeah, calling from the Big Island. So yeah, and also, I have the fourth option for your first caller.
Oh,
and it
do
ties
tell.
into why the supernatural would even exist. So this is an older idea of the deity. Instead of it being immaterial, it's actually absolute substance. It is the highest possible energy density that space can even hold. I know it seems like a radical concept, but you're familiar with the initial singularity of the Big Bang, that idea?
Correct.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So combine that with quantum field theory. In other words, it's not an infinitesimal point-like dot. The field of the singularity, imagine it like an infinite quantum field. It has no ends. And even embedded in the logic of the Big Bang story, the singularity is all there is. There's no nothing space outside of it. It effectively has no borders. So it's a little bit of a conceptual shift there to think of it as an infinite substance, and then space-times arise like bubbles in that substance.
I think I've heard this theory before, actually.
Yep.
Yeah, the idea that universes are actually bubbles and that there might be many of them.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
We could go into a multiverse theory, but so here's the thing. When this bubble is opened, okay, it's kind of like the original substance. This hyperdense quark soup is what science would call it. It's just this smear of subatomic particles to the point of a liquid. There's no space in between individual particles. There are no individual particles. It's actually not possible because there's no empty space. Space is filled.
Okay, so I have to cut you off.
Closed space-time. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to cut you off super quick because you're getting really scientific really fast and you're going to start talking way over us and it's going to be really hard to go back. So first of all, like I have a couple of questions right off the bat. So this thing that you're presenting to us, just so I'm kind of clear, are you presenting, because it says, why would the supernatural even exist? Are you presenting a theory of how there is no God, but what the universe is like?
No, I'm a perennial panentheist. In other words, the perennial philosophy is that the many different things that we see comes from a single source, and that all actual spiritual traditions are different takes on a fundamental reality that we do share.
Okay, and so it's
then panentheism. Yeah.
Okay, I know panentheism. Okay.
I don't, and maybe the listeners don't either. So really quickly, what is it?
Well, he kind of just explained it there.
Oh, okay, that's what it is then. Okay.
All the stuff that we find here is within a larger God, panentheism.
Got it. Okay.
So anyway, long story short, if you consider this oceanic singularity, this is the Almighty. There's nothing possible greater, and I would argue that it is the only thing worthy of the title God. There's no possible greater thing than an infinite absolute.
So it sounds like you're defining.
Think of it. Okay. I'm sorry. What?
You're defining the universe as being God, like the universe and everything in it is God.
Sort of is.
Is within.
You have to bear with the one who's never heard of this before.
I don't want to tell you what you believe. Okay, I'm just from my experience with yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So if you can imagine this infinite singularity like liquid light, it is just an ocean of liquid photons. Universes are places where the space is bent apart, and the inherent forces, like this is pure physics, are spectrumed apart just like a rainbow. Okay. And our type of matter, out of one of 6 types, is in one of these. Let's go with 6 colors that are unfolded when a universe gets lofted open. Okay, our type of material does not rise by itself, and we actually have scientific evidence of the universe being able to stabilize 5 other types of matter. One of them is in the standard model of particle generation. And just real quick, we got quarks, right? There's
Hold
three
on, just
density levels
real quick
of
before
quarks.
we move too far into it, I just want to clarify something, because it's my understanding that when the universe was in the singularity state, that there was no matter, that it was that there was an energetic state before the at the point of the singularity.
I have heard that before.
Yeah, it's beyond matter. Like atoms are like 0.0012 spaces, 1% actual stuff taking up the volume. And then we go further into quantum field theory. Those actual subatomic particles are excitational states of universe-spanning field. So it's more like water droplets jumping off the surface of water because it's being vibrated. So what we're calling actual stuff isn't really, it's made of very, very, very small amounts of what we call actual stuff. So what I'm talking about is no space between subatomic particles. It's far denser than matter. I mean, we would get into the nuclear pasta type stuff in the middle of neutron stars to find anything of comparison.
Okay, so
that's what an absolute means.
Just to kind of bring it into like some sort of really coherent argument that we can talk back and forth about, because I could probably listen to you talk about this for about an hour and probably understand very little of it. What I'd really rather do is like kind of start to go point by point and sort of either digest it and sort of start to understand it, or maybe pick it apart and ask some questions about it.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Sure. Yeah, and there's just too much for the amount of the show we have left. And so, dang it, like I could spend hours talking to you about this, but I need to kind of bring it back down to simple.
I can wrap it up real fast.
Well, if I could just ask you like a question or two. Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So
basically, when a universe is spectrum, sorry, you go ahead. I'll listen.
No, I just wanted to let you finish. Go ahead.
Okay, so when a universe is spectrumed open, our type of matter is only one of the 6 colors that simultaneously arise. And the other colors would represent other, you could call them membranes or regions of space-time that are in this universe, but are beyond our observable sphere. So they're parallel like membranes that we share the universe with. And this would be evident in the 5 times more dark matter that we can't see, but is influencing physical matter, and the 5 other types of quarks that our universe renders stable in the standard model of particle generation. We've got 3 levels of quarks and their anti-partners, and pretty darn good surety that there's no force density above that.
Are you saying that
so
antimatter
those other densities actually evaporate in ours?
Are you saying that the antimatter then that we observe exists outside? So our bubble has matter, and that the antimatter we observe, the reason we can't find it is because it exists outside of our bubble?
Outside of our membrane, but inside the same universal bubble. So it's still within the... So here, I got you. All of matter is like cool colors in the rainbow, and all of antimatter are the warm colors.
And this is just an analogy, right?
Arising, but they are separate. Yeah, it's an analogy.
Okay,
we can get into geometry, but that's a
no. Let's keep it at analogies, because I'm really grasping to understand all this.
Sure.
Okay, so we have all the spectrum, and I get it. So keep going.
Yeah, it's spectrumed apart, and our region is directly surrounded by another larger region that would pattern for the next density level of matter-type particles. So you could call it a parallel realm. I just call it a parallel membrane. And they all occupy one single universe. So each universe that gets lofted open in this has an antimatter side and a matter side, because they are inverse to each other. Okay?
Okay.
The charge inversion between matter and antimatter switches the positive and negative between outside and inside.
Yeah, I do understand that. Yeah. And that if they hit, then they abolish each other or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're familiar with cymatics, like sound or vibration creating forms of sand?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. Cool. So similarly, in like a bucket full of water, we got a round bucket full of water. When you vibrate it, it makes circular rings going to the inside. If you had a square bucket full of water and you vibrate it, those square boundaries would make a square wave going on the inside. So what would a spherical container, what kind of internal waveform would that make? I'm thinking spherical. So that's where you get the beginning of the atomic anatomy as like this like a note inside of an instrument body. And the instrument body is the universe itself, and its outer periphery is spherical. There's one more feature that splits this into two equal hemispheres, a top half and a bottom half, like a disc or the surface of water, if you could think of the bottom of this bubble full of water. So the stuff above that surface has an inverse orientation to the stuff below that surface.
Okay, so I need to cut you
So
off here
that's
again really
where-
quick. And I'm going to be the jerk that keeps cutting you off because once it starts going over my head, I can visually follow it and then I can't. And what I'm worried about is that a lot of our listeners are probably on the same page as me. Because you're getting into some really scientific, heavily, like the physics stuff. So you said, hey, let me finish. And I really want you to finish. But if we could just slowly go point by point and just make sure that.
Is this, are you adhering, just to clarify, are you adhering to like M theory? Is that the direction that that you're going with the whole construct that you're talking about here? Is that what we're visualizing as a form of M theory?
So what I understand of M theory is that there's a larger background bulk and there are membranes traveling through it. And at the intersection or interaction of those membranes, space-times get lofted open. Is that your understanding? Okay.
Yeah, my understanding of M theory as a concept is more simple than that. But yeah, I'll just as far as what you said there, I'm not sure if that properly describes it or not. But I'm just wondering because I have a more simplified version of it. So go ahead.
Well, so I'm wondering if you could do something for me, Isaiah. Could you do me a favor?
Sorry, repeat that?
I was wondering if you could do me a favor, like while we're having this conversation. It's going to sound really pedantic, but when it comes to physics and arguments about physics, I think the best people to have that are physicians, like not physicians. My brain's physics
physicists.
Physicists. Thank you. My brain went plot. There's just too many things cramming into it right now. So when it comes to the minute details of these theories, the best people to have these conversations are the ones that are experts at it. So when you're talking to us on a show or when the audience is listening, is there, it's going to sound really horrible, but is there any way of like putting it at like a 5th grade level where it's like, okay, you have these marbles in a jar and then you have sand that fills in the space between the marbles. And then you have like jelly that goes between the sand. I mean, something that kind of makes it a little bit. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I hate to, because right now what we're doing is we're talking over everybody's head and I'm not sure how we can determine whether or not. Yeah, no, I actually appreciate it that you're willing to do that.
I definitely appreciate. Thank you for bringing it back down. So yeah, I can definitely use real easy examples for this. So
perfect.
Let's take an imaginary square piece of rubber. Okay, it's a sheet of rubber, and you grab one side at your chest, and you grab the other side with your other hand. So you've got a bunch of rubber in both hands. Now stretch your outer hand out and keep one hand at your chest. So now you got a bunch of rubber at your center. And you've got a handful of rubber as far out as your arm can stretch. Now you've got this like string, this stretch out thin piece of rubber. And if you kept on stretching, if it would never break, you would thin it out to the point it would be like an atom wide. You wouldn't even see it, kind of thing.
Right.
You get that idea?
Yeah, perfect.
So so now let's apply that to the beginning of a universe. So out of this infinite mass is kind of like rubber. And this is basic physics, equal opposite reaction, right? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So we got to make a space in this stuff somehow. We haven't even gotten to a universe yet. So it has to move, the original field has to move outward to make a voided space. That's our bubble. That's our universe. Well, an equal opposite reaction, it pulls to the center of that space as well and stretches out a field in between a center and a periphery.
And this is mathematical? Like you've seen math on this? Or is it hypothetical?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, there's
and I'm not doubting the math. I'm just wondering.
The field has an 8-fold symmetry. And so I would look for something like octonions in the math involving subatomic particles, which is way the hell over my head. But
I was about to say you're slipping back into genius talk again.
So that center and periphery, that really basic shape, these are just spheres. If you cut that in half, how do you write it? It's a 2-dimensional object now. It's a circle around a dot, which is an extremely old symbol for God and for the beginning. It's found in Ra's name. It's found, it's called the circumpunct. It's formed with the compass. There's so much myth and legend around that symbol. It goes way back to the origins of our mythos, our religions, and things like that. So one of the ways I look at our mythos and history is that there was a time when we knew kind of how the universe works. I don't see civilization rising as a linear ascent. We've risen and fallen and risen and fallen. And I got all this just from considering an actual infinite and applying equal opposite reaction. Pretty basic stuff.
So now we're moving on to something a little bit different, which is
real
like,
quick. I want to thank Ian Davenport for his
I'm so into this. I'm not paying attention. Yeah. Thank you, Ian.
his sticker. Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, so now we're moving on to something a little bit different, which is the civilizations and the advanced technology civilization theory. And I've heard it a lot, and I found some arguments compelling and some arguments not compelling. But what I want to know from you kind of is you have this whole sort of, and I hate to put it this way, but it almost sounds like you have sort of like this religion or this worldview built around this theory. And my question is, if there's so much science behind it, and if it's so sound, why is this not the prevailing theory?
Honestly, several reasons, actually. Okay. Some of the leading scientists, both geologists, cosmologists, and everything, had an initial bias against any kind of religious story. So anything that was discovered that remotely could be attributed to something biblical was eschewed or shunned. And certainly that's not like pure science, but nonetheless, it was part of the social milieu at the time. And I think science is still catching up. And it's great that we go off what we observe and what we can test and everything. But again, we gotta imagine outside the boxes that we prescribe for ourselves.
I'm actually really interested in that this idea that that the scientific community has a bias towards religious concepts. It seems like more what's happened is that the religious concepts didn't hold up to the scientific method, and they don't hold up to the scientific method.
Yeah, I think the first problem that I have with that claim is that a lot of the early scientists were Christian, and they were trying really hard to prove their cosmology. And in some cases, they were sort of in some ways able to. So I don't really see that particular argument holding up. And then the other thing is a lot of these things that you're talking about are anti-Christian. Like none of this stuff that you've presented supports Christianity. So I'm really having a hard time with that one.
I'm not necessarily trying to support Christianity, but I do see it as an instructional mythos, which is more than we really have time to get into. Let me give you a specific example. In geology, the early geologists were catastrophists. The evidence they found suggested that some huge freaking thing happened not all that far in the past, maybe 13,000 years ago or so, and it totally rearranged the landscape. Well, it was too close to like the Great Flood and things like that. So a lot of the paradigm that was adopted and can be supported is gradual.
Wait, what about
theological?
What catastrophe? What catastrophe are we talking about? I'm a big nerd, so I kind of like this stuff. Are we talking about like the KT extinction event or the Great Dying? The Great Dying would have been into the Permian 450 million years ago, whereas the KT was 65 million years ago. Both were huge, catastrophic extinction events, but there are 6 of them altogether that have hit over the last billion years or so. So is one of those specifically the catastrophic event that you're referring to?
Yes, I think the main one that spawned most of the mythos was 13,000 years ago, and it was a multi-headed comet hit that wrapped around the planet. It ended the Ice Age. It was the cause of the Younger Dryas flash melt and then refreeze. It rose global ocean levels 400 feet. And there's evidence of a global firestorm in the northern hemisphere that was sparked off by it causing absolute climate chaos for decades.
Okay, and do modern geologists, because I'm not familiar with that particular one, and I'm not going to claim to be very familiar with geological history, period, but other than just a passing knowledge. But because you said past geologists. Sure, and I'm not saying it didn't happen. What I'm asking is what you were saying, there's this conspiracy where early geologists didn't want these catastrophic events to match up with biblical history. I'm curious what modern geologists think about all this stuff.
It's still coming out. So there's part of a crater that's been revealed in Greenland, the Hiawatha crater, that matches the same time period. There's huge. You have to see it from the air to be able to appreciate the scale of splash damage these things did all around. Like these huge oval-shaped, not necessarily craters, but just oval geologic features that are surrounding a much larger crater-like feature. One of the main ones is the Hiawatha crater in Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and these are scientists that are discovering these things.
Yes, geologists. One of them is Randall Carlson. He's again he's a bit out there, which is one of the reasons why I love him. Hell, I'm a bit out there, but he's a geologist, and he's showing scale and variance between these massive runoffs creating like the Grand Canyon and the scablands that you would have to have 300 feet of moving water to yank bedrock up off the ground and deposit it way the hell away. Things like there's a smaller hypothesis of a giant lake that was let go during the beginning of the Ice Age, and that did all the damage.
Do you know what else moves really giant rocks though? Like there's
not only
lots of things, but go ahead, Brian.
I was gonna say not only is the theory of the catastrophe with the lake, when the glaciers were kind of receding, the lake that broke open and just poured all of its water across North America, is that there's actually physical evidence for that event happening. We actually see you can actually stand up on the hill. I believe it's in the Black Hills in South Dakota. You can actually stand up and you can see where it kind of washed out as that dam broke. It was a dam of ice and just glacier material, rocks and tree branches and whatever got caught up in the ice. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, we have evidence of a massive, pardon the term, flood of water at that time, but it's attributed to Lake Okanagan, it was called. And just try to appreciate the kinetic force and release of a comet hitting the ice cap. I mean, they impact 3 times faster than meteorites. The amount of heat and flash vaporizing of all that water would very easily account for not only the 200-foot rise in ocean level that was in 2 pulses, but also exactly what Lake Okanagan is attributed to having caused this massive washout that basically ended the megafauna of the North American continent.
Okay, when it comes to megafauna, this is a topic I just love. I love we can actually trace
Thank you.
We can actually trace the extinction events of the megafauna to the earliest, in some North America, you see it with the arrival of the Clovis people. Now, humanity evolved. They evolved in Africa, and then civilization evolved in the Middle East. So humans have been kicking around Africa for a couple million years. We've been in the Middle East and in the Indian subcontinent for maybe a half a million years shorter than that, but we've been there for a long time. So the megafauna in those areas basically they evolved alongside of us. So they really have this natural drive to coexist with us, and these instincts that these animals in other areas of the world just didn't have. So when these 2-legged apes arrived in North America, the mammoths and the giant ground sloths really didn't. They didn't know to be scared of them. So there was this mass extinction event that just rolled along, and you can actually trace the last evidence of these animals with the arrival of humans to within sometimes. While we're still seeing it, we've seen it in modern time, because the islands in the Pacific, those were kind of the last vestige of these rare giant animals, and as soon as people came to those islands, they wiped them out too. You see it with like the moa, the dodo. Essentially, birds are really prone to suffer from this in island conditions. South America was actually an island too, and got connected with North. Okay, I'm going off on a tangent here. Okay, so South America was connected by the time people got there anyway. But we actually can clock the movement of humanity across the globe with these major extinction events. Now, I'm not saying no animals died in an impact event. I'm not saying no animals died in that flood during the Younger Dryas,
or from climate change.
However, I am leaning more towards humanity being the cause of the extinction of the megafauna across the globe.
Yeah. I mean, certainly they would have been dealt a huge blow like the dinosaurs were. All the big, complex organisms are going to have an extremely hard time when the normal environmental balance is just thrown into absolute chaos. There's no sunlight for, I don't know, weeks or months or more. And so the ones that survive would be easily picked off by man as well. A real interesting feature off the coast of Russia are called the Bone Islands. And it's just piles and piles and piles of megafauna bones, like they were a part of some huge wash.
I kind of want to back this up a little bit because we're getting down this like incredibly geeky and fun sort of like rabbit hole, but the whole, and I love it. Like, I mean, no, I'm going to have to like hit Brian up in private and be like, hey, I'm a cultural anthropologist and you're a geek and let's get together and talk. But okay. So the original question though, getting kind of back to that and getting back on track is, so you have these extinction events, you have this sort of conspiracy that you have with scientists either purposely misrepresenting or whatever, these natural phenomena, or like, let's just say that there's 2 or 3 different reasons why scientists can give misinformation. Let's say one of them is they deliberately want to lie. One of them is that they just get the information wrong. And the other one is that they do the best with the information that they have, but that they're missing other information. And I'm sure that there's a myriad other reasons why scientists get things wrong. But let's just kind of go with that for a second. And let's say, yes, scientists got things wrong. What about your specific theory? Like, what makes yours more true, or why is yours the correct version versus what's mainstream?
I think it's plausible with all the evidence I have been able to find, and that takes a long time to get into a mainstream story. So like the mainstream story we have is the paradigm of the last several decades. And we keep learning, we keep updating. Like, oh, we learn more about magnetism. It's not a supernatural effect. It's because all the atoms are in alignment, sharing electrons and things like that. So I think, well, it's a constant discovery. I think we're in the process of still writing our past story. And I think that this catastrophe is part of it. I think it both lends to fallen angel mythos and global flood mythos. We had an impact in the Indian Ocean.
What I hear you saying is that a lot of these myths and stuff that we have from all these different religions, that they can be related back to different events. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Like, so for example, if there was a great flood I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, just think about it. You have a multi-headed comet flying down towards the Earth, sweeping, what do you want to call it, a third of the stars out of the sky with its tail, bringing hell to Earth, and all this fallen angel, rebel angel mythos is easily explained by comet impacts. We had a major one 5,500 years ago in the Indian Ocean called the Burple Crater. We've got cuneiform writing talking about this happening. The Sumerians documented this. We have the Egyptians saying that Ra sent Sekhmet down in the form of a big shaggy lion's head, and the Nile was filled with blood from her wrath.
Yes,
what a comet be mythologized as.
I completely agree. Like, we even have comets that strike today, right? Like, comets are not new, and they go back way before there were humans. And so I agree with you that when you talk about these cataclysmic events, whether it's a comet or a flood, or earthquake, volcano, whatever, that a lot of times they were related to deities, and they were worked into the myths and the religions of that time. In fact, I've even heard it said that Yahweh, the god of the Jewish tradition, started out as a volcano and a war god. And now, don't quote me on that. It's just something I heard. But if you go back through religious history and where it all connects, you can definitely see where, at least in part, the myths are based on their perceptions of reality. Now, where things get added to it is where we start to get into whether it's true or not. My question is, like, so I'm agreeing with you there, but you made the claim that we have these rise and falls in technology. And to a certain degree, I would tend to agree with you. Like, we had the wiping out of the Alexandria Library, and that's in modern history. We know that happened. Right. So we know that information gets lost. I would love to know what was in there. Right.
Technologies get lost too. There's
the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what you're talking about is sort of like this ancient, we used to know the secrets of the universe. and that's why we have this circle and this dot. That's where you're losing me. Like, where do you get that from?
Okay, so the idea of infinity has been around a long time. If you want a secular example, check out Chaos, Prima Materia, and Apeiron from Greece. That was by Anaximander. Apeiron, this formless primordial substance that all the different things are made out of. This goes back even further. It's called the cosmic ocean cosmogony. The Egyptians had it. The Sumerians had it. The Egyptians started with a great watery expanse called Nun, was the god Nun, and there was no space for creation, so Nun made a bubble inside of itself, and then a primordial mound in the center of the bubble, and Ra arose on that mound and started creating things by speaking them into being.
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of
the
ancient
circle around
myths
the
that
top.
involve water creation. Yeah, they can sort of group together different
so
creation myths. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that you think about the
So
way
easy.
that we reproduce and your water breaking. So wherever that baby is coming from,
I would say it's even
water,
more
so-
simple than that. I would say we're always like we're surrounded by water. The earth is mostly water, and like water is a big
We're
part.
mostly water. Yeah,
We're
I get
yeah.
you.
So I can see how life coming from water naturally, like what he said in the womb, and the fact that so much of the earth is covered in water. The water myth isn't really that compelling to me in terms of how it relates to like very specifically to your claims. Where I mean,
Okay. What? I got it. I got your answer.
Okay.
I have your answer. What is the closest analogous physical thing that humans can see and touch and play in that would represent an infinite expanse of undifferentiated substance that can just become any shape you want it to make? What would we use? If I was going to tell a story about the infinite singularity that made all things, what human level?
Oh yeah, like water.
item?
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. And the
ocean,
way that we
the
translate
ocean,
the
yeah.
ancient texts and stuff, the word water a lot is used for. Sometimes the modern books will translate it to like ether or something along those lines, but we make it an analog to water. I get you there. I'm with you there, and I'm on board with that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it's such a highly functional symbol, which is why it would be storified for passing down through time in more primitive cultures that have no idea about universal beginnings or have even thought about it or anything like that. So, and then again, just considering basic physics, equal opposite reaction. If this infinite ocean has to move away from a space to make a bubble for creation, it also has to move to the center of that space. Equal opposite reaction. So that's where I get the circle around the dot. And that, as a vibratory container, patterns directly for atoms. A peripheral sphere-like, and we've got the cloud model of electrons, but it's sphere-ish with a nucleus. And you've got a probability field strung out between it that the electrons appear in.
So I have a question about like ancient symbology, right? So the circle and dot is very, very, very popular in ancient symbology throughout many different cultures, and it has many different meanings. Sometimes it's the sun, sometimes it's the earth, sometimes it's directions. I just recently learned that the petroglyphs in the area that I live are actually directional. So when you see like a buffalo and it has a certain number of things sticking off of its head, the buffalo actually signifies something, and those things signify the distance where they found it, right? Like, water is X number of miles away or whatever. And so that you have this symbology that already has a meaning, and we can determine some of the meanings. Yes. So my question is, if the circle and the dot exists with a specific given meaning that we know about, how do you determine that this other one that exists that we don't know the meaning to it? How do you determine that that is the meaning of that circle and that dot? Like, where is that recorded?
I don't. I just find I find it plausible, is what I have to say.
Ooh, I like that. I love that you use the word plausible.
Neat that you mentioned that. I find it more plausible than anything else I've heard, and I'm very open to hearing more things.
That's
circle around the dot. In trail sign, if you're walking on a trail and you find that sign, whoever left it, they mean they have gone back home the way that they came. I
did not know that.
Cool.
I like the hobo signs or whatever, the traveler signs. Is that where that one comes from?
I guess, I don't know. It's known as trail sign. That like instead of an arrow or a cairn just pointing where you go, you've reached the end of someone else's trail, and that sign means that they have gone back home, but the way that they came. They haven't gone any other way. They haven't gone further than that circle and that dot.
Okay, so
then it also means
I
gold
think
in
you're
alchemy.
you're almost like proving my point that there's a lot of different meanings behind that symbol. And so if we're gonna assign meaning to something, and we do this all the time as anthropologists and as archaeologists, where someone will find something, and because a similar culture has a similar thing, they will assign meaning to that thing without necessarily knowing. And then as they do more research, now they've got to turn around and put their foot in their mouth, and they have to correct themselves. And that's why we get so much bad press, is because what we try to do as people is, as soon as we have a thing, we try to come up with the answer to it, or the story behind it, or the reason for it. And then we find that as we learn more and more and more, we're wrong, right? So I guess
story making ape.
Yes, and you, my friend, are human too. So I think my point is that it sounds like you have a really good claim, or maybe even if you have some evidence. Yeah, I mean, it could. I hate to say that it's just a neat story. Like, I'm not going to belittle it that much and just say, oh, that's a cool idea. Like, you have something that's really complicated. It's really articulate. It's really well thought out. But it's still at that claim stage. So I think my question is, how do you get yourself, or how do you inspire somebody else or a scientist to get from, hey, we have all these different theories about the beginning of the universe and the nature of the universe. Here's mine. Let's test it. Like, what's step 2 for you?
Okay. All right. The test I use is math and geometry, and just you gotta do a little bit of logic work, very little, before you get to the geometry that gives you testable answers on what we'd find in universal phenomenon. So it's simply this: the infinite one expanse, its waveform, are infinite ones. The original field was at maximum density, so the waveform is also at maximum density. The simplest possible expansive shape is a sphere. So what kind of predictions is a maximum sphere pack? They're all the same size. They're all the same expression of the same original thing. How much space does each sphere take up versus the space between the spheres? Okay, this is a hard.
So Isaiah,
we're getting hard, but this is a known mathematical problem.
Yeah, we're getting back into the heavy physics of it. Yeah, we don't have any time because we're at the end of the show. I guess my question is, like, you're at the point now where if this is going to be viable, you need to move it forward. Like, not with us, not on this show, but like, if this is a viable theory for the actual reality of our universe, it needs to be tested and put through peer review and talked about with scientists. And like, Brian and I are duly unqualified to do that. But what I'm thinking is, it's you have this very complex idea. I don't see where you're making the same connections. I don't make the same connections you make, but that doesn't mean that I'm right. So I guess that's where we're, or that you're right. And I appreciate that sort of honesty. I think that's phenomenal. Like, I think for this to become viable, it needs more than just a discussion between the three of us.
Yeah, it's really interesting ideas, and I like brainstorming about, speculative history as well. So I'm always down for that. But go ahead.
I'm going to finish real quick because I want to be able to give the physicists something to actually chew on.
I think that's something that you're going to have to do, honestly, like through academic channels. Like, I think if you just spout it off here. Yeah, I'm sorry, because we are at the end of the show. We actually have gone a little bit over.
You can look up sphere packing.
Look up what?
I'm sorry, but you can look up sphere packing on the wiki. It's a known mathematical problem. It's called the cannonball problem, or the orange problem.
Stacking spheres together. I get it. Yeah. It's I understand the issue.
My last sentence on this is that the percentage of space that the expanded spheres take up is just about 74% of the whole. The space between the spheres, where the original field is now contracted into motion, is 26% of the total. Okay, this is math beyond my ability to do, but luckily there's a lot more smarter people that have done this and found this to a high degree of surety. What is the dark energy expansive constant versus the gravitational constant that we find in this universe? It's 74% expansion to about 26% gravitational contraction, and that gravitational contraction is 1 part matter that we can see and 5 parts dark matter. So that's where my logic hits the mathematical rubber road. That's where
you need to go and take it forward, and get it tested and get it talked about.
That's
Because for me as a
math
layperson to be like, yeah,
above
the
my
two numbers
head.
are the same. I can't confirm that for you.
I'm just taking your word for a lot of the things you're saying tonight.
Yeah.
Honestly.
No, look it up. I use a lot of different words, and I've checked all this myself. I do string it together, but I can back it up. And I thank you so much for the opportunity to chat and share it with you. I do appreciate
that
it.
is fascinating. Yeah. And I hope that it was more me asking questions out of sheer ignorance than me trying to tear your argument apart. I say if you think you have something that's that solid, that it needs to move forward, because every single brain that we have in the game trying to figure out our world and our past and our history is one more brain.
If you do move forward on that, let us know. I'd be interesting to have a follow-up about that. So
yeah, Brian was putting links in the chat for me about some of the stuff you were talking about. So don't think I won't be looking this stuff up and learning more about it, because it fascinates me, but it's
okay. Yeah.
It's so far
I'll put
over my head.
in the chat too of some of the stuff that I found.
Definitely.
For your perusal.
Yeah. Thank you.
We always appreciate your calls here, Isaiah, but we're fixing to wrap up. So
for sure. Here's Brian. Thank you. And thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you, Isaiah. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, have a pleasant evening on the island there.
Next time.
Yeah, a little jealous.
Aloha.
Aloha.